Welcome everyone to February 2025's La Hora. My name is Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo. I'm the director of the Parsons School of Design's Deed Research Lab, and I'm delighted to be trying a new experiment today. For the first time, we are live with a studio audience with students here at Parsons on campus, and so happy that that my colleague Lucía Cuba agreed to participate in today's event. So thank you so much, Lucía. Lucía is a Peruvian designer. She's a scholar. She's a educator, a researcher. She's I would say, also activist. And last fall, while we witnessed via social media an entire debate around cultural appropriation emerge in Lima and in Peru and then across Latin America, Lucia and I were connecting on Instagram, and so I was delighted that she agreed to join me today and talk a little bit about the issues there. So we'll have a conversation, Lucia and I, and then we will open it up for your questions or comments, and feel free as we go along to add comments or questions to the chat, and we can return to those once we're open up for Q&A. Sound good?
Yes, perfect.
Great.
And for those of you who are here, feel free as well to make questions and we'll reiterate those on screen.
Excellent. So Lucia, I thought maybe we could start with you introducing yourself, your practice, and what that journey may be from Peru to New York.
We might need a little bit more time. Well, I'm a Peruvian designer, scholar, based in Lima for the majority of my life. Not anymore, actually. Moved to New York almost 15 years ago, both to engage in a journey of study and then in one of opportunity. I've been teaching at Parsons since 2015, but I've been engaged in education for over 25 years as a designer formally since 2005. And my background is both in fashion design, but I first studied social science. I did social psychology and public health, and I think it was organically that I started feeling the need to not work in an isolated way within one discipline and the other. The place where I come from, also discipline-wise, academic framework-wise, it's very conservative. So, and I'm talking about also when I engaged in my first university degree studies, that was more than 25 years ago. Like, it was very much were one thing or the other, and cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, you name it, was not necessarily part of many conversations. It is not yet part of many conversations. Not a lot has changed in most of the 25 years that I'm reflecting upon. But definitely at a personal level, it did. So I struggled at the beginning of my, I guess, creative practice engagement to for it to have sense. I come from a privileged space of multiple support, family support, and my own background in social science allowed me to pay for my creative practice, which is something that I would not have been able to do unless I was working in that sort of dynamic. So when I started to engage in a practice in fashion, I'm particularly focused on fashion as a design form. I also feel that I came in with a level of freedom that was not based on need, on financial need, but rather creative exploration, which I fully understand placed me in a space where I had the opportunity to explore without the fear of not making a profit out of what I was doing. And that now, even in the context of my role as a facilitator in educational spaces for fashion design, feels very problematic in a way, because we are teaching or facilitating processes where we are expecting that our students can engage in financially sustainable forms as well in their livelihood experiences. But at the same time, that while we are engaging in these processes and learning out these frameworks and the possibilities of creative practices, we're also very mindful about the multiple constraints that are around that. I experienced my own, but at the same time, I had a lot of flexibility about working across different fields as well.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, years later, and after a lot of personal struggle, because I thought, oh, I need to quit one thing and then do the other, I realized that things were organically merging, and that those topics that I really was passionate about in my social science life and public health life were very much the topics that I was still interested in engaging with in my creative practice-based life. And that an idea of a model of practice or a form of practice in fashion design, which I kind of started prototyping, exploring in the form of a small commercial brand under my name with my own production, etc., didn't really make sense to me, neither at that time nor today. But again, from a space of the privilege to reflect upon, well, what is this? And I'm not really sure what is this. I don't like to define it either. And I think I've mentioned right now we're sitting with a big class. And I mentioned to you folks at the beginning of the class that we tend to categorize our practice. And, sometimes, depending on the year, I might recognize my practice more within fashion or within design or within creative practices, and how those clusters start to feel might change as well. I am a creative practitioner. I do love engaging in research processes. I appreciate and really love engaging in formal and non-formal educational processes as well. And at some point, I'd like to mix all of that as well. I forgot what your question was, but here we are.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. Lucia and I had the opportunity to travel to Guatemala on a tour with globally renowned designers. We won't mention their names. It doesn't matter what their names are, but just to say there is a trend of designers who go on tours, touring indigenous craft communities, artisans, etc. And so we were doing a tour. Lucia and I were there on behalf of Parsons, and I would say that was maybe the first time that we immersed ourselves in conversations about the artisan sector and some of the challenges about these designers parachuting in. What is your recollection of that trip?
Well, I was just thinking about that because it was around this time in 2019, the beginning of 2019, January, in fact. And this face always emerges when I think of that moment. I mean, it gave me the possibility of getting to know you a little bit better. So it was really nice on that end. And the entire trip was quite beautiful because of where we were. But yeah, it felt, I'm going to use the non-academic term, weird in a way. Weird because on one end, it was a mix of I guess it was a clear overview of a package of how we tend to engage in practices when it comes to thinking about North and South, possibilities versus realities, fashion in particular, and this very challenging conversations that are constantly emerging when it comes to thinking about local practices and global expectations and wealth, extreme wealth, from an industry and a system such as fashion, where this systems of oppression are what we deal with on an everyday experience, and that as much as intentions can come from a place of genuine affection are often still perpetuating these models and these structures that are not necessarily benefiting those who could also benefit the most from this, and that they still respond to trends, to opportunities that are questionable, depending on how we see them too. Anyway, yeah, I had a really beautiful time, but it did make me feel problematized around different things. And also then in the form of our participation, I remember this was one question that we asked ourselves, like, what exactly is it that is our role here, representing a particular institution? And there wasn't necessarily a particular goal rather than to be in place in a way, which was quite interesting to me as well. It's like, okay, it's almost like this observant kind of participant, but at the same time not participant, but that's it. It's like a happening, but at a happening of something that is the everyday experience of many, many, many individuals that not only we study or that we talk about, that this is life, and this is what we should be reflecting upon greatly, especially in the context of classrooms and design as a process and as a framework or an idea of a practice, and then what should we be problematized or not by this type of experiences. And we also got the chance to meet a lot of wonderful people and very interesting dynamics around on a specific location, and the communities that were not only already there, very active, but the networks that were also very mindful of the fact of, well, what could this level of, I guess, networking could provide, and in what way could it better support the local communities and the initiatives that were already emerging greatly. I mean, from academia, from museums, from the communities and the artisans themselves, like in terms of, well, how do we all have a conversation around this and work together? And I've actually tried to follow later. I mean, I do follow some of the individuals that were either social media or the network that was supposed to be launched at that moment as well. Well, then immediately after COVID hit. So I think a lot of the intentions in that moment also were met by the reality of what we've experienced in different levels. But yes, I felt that.
Yeah. So in the trip, we were being followed around by a camera crew that was brought by Livia Firth, who runs Eco Sessions out of the UK.
The business value.
Okay. But if you search on YouTube, I'm sure you could find the brief documentary video that was created of this trip. And one of my appearances in the video is to help define appropriation and to comment on what some people suggest is a better way of approaching cultural appropriation, which is cultural appreciation. And as I was inviting people to join us today for La Hora, I was asking also on Instagram, what's the difference between collaboration, which is a word that designers use often when entering artisan communities, appreciation, which often drives somebody's interest in the travel or in the work in partnership, and then appropriation. And certainly encourage you all to chime in on the chat, but perhaps we can shift a bit to what happened last fall in Lima. And for people who maybe didn't follow it, if you could just briefly tell us what were the circumstances.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna read. Well, I'm not sure.
Oh, you can read it.
I can show it too, I think. But I can read, so we use our imagination. So this is, I'm reading from an Instagram account called Be Latina News. I just searched on Google, cultural appropriation, Peruvian designer, Anissa Mames. So again, this is a very very publicized case that just this was being brought to a public's attention this last December, if I'm not mistaken, or November at the end of it. It will resonate with many similar cases. We do, and then we can talk a little bit more about that, but I'm reading into this Instagram post from this particular independent news channel. Peruvian designer Anissa Manez accused of undermining indigenous artistry while using indigenous designs in her latest collection. During an event that also was produced by the Association of Sustainable Fashion, it's called in Spanish. During this event, Samanes expressed frustration over the cost of working with the Shipibo Conibo on their traditional designs. She said, "You wouldn't believe how much they wanted to charge me. I'm Peruvian too. Just because I'm from the coast doesn't make me any less Peruvian." Her statement, combined with Vogue Mexico's and Latin American editor Jose Fortesa's defense of her, claiming the community would still be starving without Samanes' support. So this particular statement at that moment, and what the captures of the videos that were circulated massively, basically capture that particular moment, both of the statement and the discomfort of a Limeñan designer reflecting on what appeared to be a really, I'm trying to use a proper term, unfortunate encounter with the opportunity that she was bringing to a particular community of indigenous community from Peru, the Shipibo Conibo community, in order to ask them to teach them to use a specific technique. And upon her response, when they gave her the prize, she thought the price was very high and she was offended by it because she claimed to have the ownership as well, because she was Peruvian, of traditional indigenous knowledge as well as those that were practiced within that community. Accompanied by that was the support of a editor of Vogue Latin America, not only reflecting on this as truth, but also widely criticizing the fact that, not criticizing, stating the fact that we are all citizens of the world, so we are all entitled to basically take anything that belongs to us from anywhere. In the world that we live in today, where social media is in the form of a hand, and that we can document processes, and that people are becoming informed in different opportunities of both ways of engaging, processes, conversations, that perhaps before they were not that present, even within their own experiences of practice. This, at least at the local level, I mean, in the context of Peruvian fashion practices, at least, has had a significant, I would love to say impact, I would say now momentum, in terms of how many local brands, especially, that work exactly under very similar perception of ways of working, and intentions around exchange or imposition or extraction of processes or inspiration, have both kept quiet and or hopefully engage in opportunities to reflect upon, well, maybe I should not be doing something similar to that. Other elements about this particular case have emerged. There has been a significant coverage for the first time as well from the local news and local media in terms of the Shipibo Conibo community and the fact that they have amazing designs and amazing textiles, and they engage in fashion practices as well. And never before we have had that level of coverage either for both the designers, the artisans that were directly involved in this particular conversation, as well as the Shipibo Conibo community, especially the one that participates also from Lima. And now you see, at least in the last, month and a half that has passed along, local magazine covers, news, local news, how do you say reportajes? Articles, news, special reports being made about not only the act of cultural appropriation, oppression, coercion around the processes involved in what appeared to be a consented and at the same time sketchy sort of exchange, because there was an exchange developed in this context. Both different parties have come to state within a legal sphere as well. Even the Ministry of Culture, that is very not present in Peruvian culture as well, has had something to say. Now we have other individuals at the local level who are also specialized, and we're talking about this a little bit earlier about legal support for the Shipibo Conigo community. So I think there's a very different moment and opportunity to really build at the local level, which we deal with this type of systems of practice that are very normalized in places such as Peru. I think we spoke about that from other perspectives as well, but they're very common and they're often not placed in conversation. At the school levels, those of us who are engaging in facilitating educational processes within fashion, textile design, we don't often speak about this, especially in such a culturally diverse space such as Peru and country like Peru, where this type of conversations, and especially in the context of creative practice, should be much more current. Well, this for sure has created a significant debate as well as an opportunity to put in conversation the importance of reflecting around one's own role, position of power, privilege, ways of engaging in this practices of extraction. What does it mean, exchanging or not, supporting or not, and so many other I think, questions that perhaps were not demanded as such, or the media, people in general were not necessarily observing that in that way. This has become, I would like to call it an opportunity, not an excuse, but an opportunity to really put a magnifying glass specifically on the practice of fashion and textile design in Peru right now. I think a lot of people are afraid as well, because we don't often engage in critical forms of conversation when it comes to our creative practices, and it is still a process, even for many educational institutions, for example, to come out front and being asked about, well, what is your opinion around it? There's a level of fear as well in terms of, well, you don't want to attack one person in particular, and of course, in this case, it is an opportunity not only to reflect about an individual making an individual expression, but it's actually a person who has been practicing within a system. And the problem is as well, the system that we still perpetuate and consume from and experience our ideas around fashion design practices and textile practices from, that continues to be this type of system, the one that normalizes abuse, oppression, that does not question the role of our roles or the ways in which we engage in this type of practice, to say the least. So yes, I don't know. You can ask me.
Excellent.
I'm not. I think there's some.
That was a great overview. Okay, Antonio has kicked off the Q&A. So, I mean, we could do that. I welcome your questions. I certainly could keep asking Lucia questions, but certainly welcome your questions. We're here in a classroom at Parsons for the class Fashion Systems Latin America. So also encourage everybody here, if you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to repeat the question for people listening online. So we'll start with Antonio's question. Antonio, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to come on camera and share it?
Oh, hi. I wasn't sure if I didn't want it to be disruptive. Hi. Good afternoon. Hi, Lucia.
¿Qué tal? Finalmente.
Finalmente, finally, we see each other. No, my question was that there is a new approach to these kind of extractivist modalities of appropriation. And some communities, particularly, I'm aware of some communities in Mexico, have decided to trademark and register their patterns and some aspects of their techniques in order to protect themselves from this kind of extractive appropriation. So my question would be, is that a good approach? Do you think that is a good practice, or maybe it is just playing the game of capitalism? And what's your opinion on this reaction and reactive modalities of protection from these communities?
We're addressing a little bit of this earlier with the class as well. I think the experience from Deep Lab is important in terms of maybe not suggesting a specific frameworks, but really thinking and looking at the local systems that are supporting or not these processes as well. I mean, legal frameworks around traditional designs or processes. I mean, in places like Mexico as well, and in specific processes too, are often as well sometimes placed in question for the purposes that you are reflecting upon right now. I think it goes down to every specific locality and how they are engaging in these conversations as well, and what that means and who benefits from this too. Sorry, Cynthia, you were going to try to, I think, share this.
Yeah,
the cultural intellect.
Didn't mean to interrupt you. Well, I'll share a few resources in the chat. One is the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative. Founder Monica Moisin has participated in one of the study groups that Deed Lab organized with 200 million artisans, and they're doing some really interesting work trying to figure out the legal frameworks around IP for culture and for ancestral knowledge. I also want to share, this is the crowdfunding campaign that the Cara Foundation is leading out, because the Mixteco community of San Pablo, Tijaltepec, outside of Oaxaca, has requested workshops focused on legal frameworks, so that there's a more level playing field between the indigenous artisan community and the big brand like Dior or Gucci or Kate Spade that might arrive and say, here's an NDA, sign this, here's how much you're going to get paid, and how might the communities also build their capacities and their skills in that regard. So that's an exciting project that we're interested in. I was in conversation with an indigenous Sami artist from northern Finland, and what he described to me was a life of what felt like a schizophrenia, where in that case, the government of Finland says, yes, we acknowledge the Sami people, we acknowledge the rights of the indigenous people, and here are all the ways in which you need to conform to the laws of the Finnish government. And so things like the border between Finland and Norway, which is invisible for Sami people because as reindeer herders, they follow the animals, and the animals aren't going to stop at a border between two nations. And so the same thing is happening with an imposition of legal frameworks, of saying to indigenous communities, we'd love to work with you, but you need to conform to the ways in which we understand the world, which is through notions of IP, lawyers, etc. So I can, add to that. Shreya, thank you for sharing cases that have emerged in India recently, Manish Malhotra, as well as AnokiUSA.com addressing this from a brand. Thank you for sharing that. What other questions, comments about anything we've been discussing, or for Lucia? You can, if you're online, you can raise your digital hand. Oh, Sukanya, I see your hand. Hi.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to understand that first, I also wanted to see the video that you mentioned on YouTube. If you could share the name maybe in the chat later on. And also, I wanted to understand what is the right way of engagement then, uh, like being mindful, a mutual consent. I mean, what are the ways of approaching a community, or because if they do want to collaborate, they do want to grow in the market. And I've been working with them before I came here. I was working with artisans in India uh, for quite some time. And what I see there is that there is some government support, but they don't really trickle down to the grassroots level. There's a lot of like systemic issues that they face, and also that the next generation doesn't want to continue the art anymore. It's just not feasible. So like, how does there's of course apprenticeship, but then people don't want to continue doing that anymore. It's not just not a great option for them.
I guess I would ask you to define collaboration.
Mhm.
How do we um, how do we define collaboration versus work for hire?
Mhm.
When I'm working, let's say in a factory, and I show up and I'm given a design and I'm told, go, you know,
Mhm.
make this.
Yeah.
I would never, as a worker, I would never say I'm collaborating, right? I'm showing up and my employer's telling me what to do, and I'm doing what my employer's telling me to do.
Yes. Mhm.
And unfortunately, the vast majority of models that we've seen of designers going into artisan communities follow that. It's not a factory floor, and the photos that we can create are more beautiful. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
poly porn used in marketing materials.
Mhm.
But what point are you able to, Sukanya, in your case, shift
Mhm.
from workers to collaborators?
Mhm.
How do they have a say? How do they have a voice? How do they have decision-making power within
Mhm.
the model that you're presenting to them? And an example I shared with the class here earlier was from a Colombian YU artisan saying we'd love to work with designers, but designers expect us to become industrialized. And in that
Mhm.
way, they're asking us to jump into the void. So in
Mhm.
the indigenous YU community, there's a period of mourning if a loved one dies.
Mhm.
A designer who comes in with an order that needs to be
Mhm.
fulfilled in 180 days doesn't
Mhm.
want to wait 4 months of the mourning
Mhm.
period, and imposes these expectations that are driven by consumers, and they're driven by the
Mhm.
systems that we're choosing to play within. So how, as since you're the bridge
Mhm.
between the community and potentially outside the community, what steps can you take to not impose external frameworks, to ensure that the
Mhm.
systems that you're bringing in really acknowledge and are inclusive of the ways of living of the community? And again, how might we hold ourselves accountable for the words that we use? Are they really collaborators, or are they the craftspeople that you're hiring to make a product that you've designed with someone else?
Yes, I think I agree with a lot of this. That most of the times what happens is like the designer gets in there, makes a collection, and then they move on to a new collection, then move to a new craft cluster, and the earlier artisan is forgotten. So I personally made it a point that I would stick to slow design, and that I would say you take your time, and what is feasible, let me know. And the stores that I work with, I tell them that we are not churning out mass production here, and I would tell the stores and the websites that we will take our own time, and we can make some pieces in advance that we can keep and take orders on, but we would not we don't follow the fast fashion way of like churning out collections. Like every new festival in India, they need a new collection, and that is not what we were trying to do. We also tried to also there are micro financial helps. I also made sure that even if the client hasn't paid me, I would pay uh, the artisan on time, because uh, for them every minute is crucial. So, and also I think in terms of design also, that I would discuss with them that, what do you think? Like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about it? Do you think this would work? So like things like that. And so I tried in that sense, but I would also say that since the business needs to survive, then we need to produce some things. And that's where I got stuck. I mean, I knew I wanted to be ethical in every possible way, but yeah, I mean, if you're not earning, then I'm not able to pay. So that's where everything kind of slowed down too much.
Yes. Yes, the Deed Lab has not seen successful poverty alleviation nor artisan empowerment through traditional business models at scale. We see successful models with designer, brand owner working with a small group of artisans, 12 people, 15 people. But those models break either because of burnout or because an investor comes in and wants greater impact. So please keep us posted on how your project evolves and would love to learn more. I know that that Lucia shared in the chat the video that we talked about, Fashionscapes, Artisans Guatemala. So you can see both of us.
Very briefly.
Both of us briefly in that video. Fernanda, you're asking, please, could you share more info, name, and community about the Colombian artisan? I'm not sure the anecdote that I shared of the Wayu artisan. Is that what you're referring to, Fernanda? Her name is Maria Cristina Gomez, and she lives in La Guajira, Colombia. And she's a Wayu artisan that I met at Expo Artesano in Medellin, Colombia in 2019. I hope that's what you were asking for. Juliana, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Or do you want me to read it?
I'm sorry. I would really appreciate if you read it because I'm kind of really busy.
Okay.
Thank you.
The question is, adding on to the Indian context, what alternatives are there besides the legal IP path, as intellectual property does not really align with indigenous concepts of community property? Asking this using an example from my tribal community in India, wherein there are too many sociopolitical complexities at the tribe level to even start the application to get the GI tag, patent, trademark, etc. Any thoughts, Lucia?
I mean, I don't know if this is a solution, but what is happening right now, I mean, going back to the Peruvian example as right now, I mean, cancel culture at that point and civic engagement in terms of this process is what happens outside of those systems where this is happening. How much of these processes we have normalized so that they are accepted by all of us, those who are directly involved in the making practices and the production and all of the entire direct systems, and those of us who observe and consume or as users of. Yes, I don't know. I do think there's an opportunity. Well, you spoke about transparency as an important both tool and principle around all processes. I think the visibility, sorry, my English and Spanish are not great right now. Visibility of processes, understanding forms of making respectful ways of engaging, aside from any legal journeys that one may want to have to protect their work, their intellectual property, the opportunity to, I don't know if necessarily to share, but to allow for their practice and their communities as well to maybe the word is shared to if their interest is set on a specific type of transaction or form of engagement, well, to reflect upon in what ways can that happen as well. I think you were prior to this conversation as well briefly mentioning the fact that for many, from access to internet to engaging with smartphones or something that can document a process, of course, is still from a space of privilege. Well, what does that mean, and how do we get to? Does this have to happen or not for them to be validated, or for specific communities of practice to be validated or to exist? And I mean, I don't know. It's complex, but I think a mix of different I would like to call it tools, but
Yeah.
at the same time, those are from my imposed perspective of what I perceive should be the form in which we should, I don't know if protect necessarily, but preserve as well, if we want to share that as well. But yeah, again, going back to this, the concrete, very brief example of what's happening right now in Peru, highlighting a particular moment that is clearly now identified as a normalized system of abuse. Now is allowing many of us involved in systems of fashion and textile practices in Peru to think about and to feel things around that, and hopefully to make sense of what then our practice should be in such a dynamic context where we need to or we can problematize and be critical about what is how is our role impacting the different individuals and the communities that we are working with or collaborating with. Sorry, that does not respond to the question, but
I think it gave a lot to think about. I would also add, what is the problem you're trying to solve, Juliana? So is that the right question? Alternatives besides the legal IP path, or what actually is the question? I think that what we really need in the artisan sector is to really always start to look at the underlying systems. So earlier today, here in the context of Latin America, talking about classism, racism, wealth accumulation by a few, power control by a few to keep the status quo for their own wealth. Those are enormous problems that it isn't a matter of intellectual property. Those are the underlying issues that maintain these communities, and like the picking of, is it an IP or is it this law or that law? But yeah, absolutely, the misalignment with concepts of property. And this is why in the lab we are really talking about these models of new forms of colonization in some communities that have been colonized and others that maybe have not experienced that are now being colonized by the imposition of frameworks that are not necessarily coming up from their culture. So I think your question might be best asked by the community that is guided by these indigenous concepts. And that's why we're really, really excited about the project with Kala Foundation, where, okay, the community has requested a workshop from a lawyer who also speaks the indigenous language, and let's follow that and see what we might learn there. Irika, I'll read your question. It's good to see conversation and action when instances such as this one are highlighted. I wonder how we can begin to reclaim ownership of certain art or techniques. For example, chintz that originated in India was then introduced to Europe under oppressive practices, has long been normalized as English floral prints, or more popularly, English cottage core. Is it even worth reclaiming such forms? Yes, absolutely. I would say it's worth reclaiming. And talking about colonization, these are amazing examples, or that particular case study, let's say, to really shine a light on.
yeah. Hey, sorry, there's some.
Abrima, this has been such a beautiful discussion. Thank you for sharing all your experiences. I'm curious, what would you say is a good way to define? Oh, hi, Abrima. You want to ask your question? I see you on camera.
Yeah, sure. Hi. Such a beautiful discussion, and thank you for everything. My two questions were, how would you define success in artisanal collaborations? Because you mentioned that you saw more success in like smaller collaborations, and I know like everyone has different ways of defining success, and also some people will say it's really successful, but then the artisans aren't really working, and I'm just curious like how you kind of define it. And then the second question was, you could mix them in the answer if you want, was just given the way the world is going, kind of this current state of the world, and without making it too big, even that's probably a big question. Like, what do you think the future kind of is? Well, like in both of your eyes, like how do you see kind of the future of this area? Just leave it like that. Yeah.
Wow, in the US, it's hard to think beyond 1 hour. Um, I can, maybe we can both answer this question. So in the Deed Lab, we use a triangle as our framework. Success would be a model that's right in the middle. And the 3 vertices of the triangle are poverty alleviation or community, economic, social development, cultural heritage, so celebration and centering and sustaining of ancestral traditions and techniques, and artisan empowerment, that they're not just a worker performing inexpensive labor, but that they are whole selves and are participating in meaningful ways within whatever the model might be. And that's how we define success. Artisan, I defer to artisans themselves to define success. For some, it's about breaking the cycle of poverty. For most of the artisans that we have met in Latin America have told us they don't want their children to be artisans. They want their children to be able to finish school and get what we would call a white collar job in an office. And that's how they might define success, right? That the model generates enough income for their kid to be able to stay in school, go to potential university or at least a technical degree, and then get an office job. How about, how would you talk of success?
I agree. I mean, I think I don't like to define it as one single thing. I think it is very much contextual and community based, and how hopefully negotiations, transactions are made, perceptions are understood, and what is it that those involved in processes that are meant to arrive at a certain outcome are actively participating in it and not just being oppressed by or coerced to a specific type of outcome. I think from the context of I don't know, the classroom is an experience. Sometimes it helps to speak and reflect about the specific moment, time, places, the people that you are working with. If you understand this process as a collaboration, in what way your role, and well, the power structures that support this process and your real intentions around these processes as well. Someone mentioned the importance of highlighting in the comments the word responsibility within these practices, and which could also be understood in so many different ways, but responsibility towards people and the planet, and what that means in terms of the principles that we can follow too. But yeah, I do agree that if there might not be a single structure, we can follow both global certificates, legal frameworks, and structures, whether we see it from the perspective of alleviation of poverty, you know, the increase of quality of life, et cetera, and what that means. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is how are these dimensions being understood as well with those who are directly involved in the processes that we're working with as well.
Yeah, and I think another, you know, Abrima, you have an amazing model and brand for everyone here to learn from as well. I think being role models in the sector is also a form of success, so that we don't continue to have these moments where a designer shows up and claims that their life experience as a privileged Peruvian designer living in the capital is the same as the Shipibo Konibo indigenous community. So I would say that
I would actually add that you're right. Thanks for saying that, both of you. And Cynthia, it's true. Something that I have noticed with that specific brand, Studio 189, is that when they so often people come in that don't look like the people. And so there's this like weird thing that happens where people were doing the work feel like they're never going to be able to be the boss, or they're never going to get to that stage. So when they see someone who came from the same community who's just working with them to build something together, it also shows that it can be possible, and it changes, like it's a mind shift that switches kind of out of colonial thinking sometimes. So I actually think that that was actually very, thank you for saying that. That is a big deal, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions here from the class? Maybe to end, we can bring it back to Latin America. Oh, there's a question, Shalmika.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I guess it's just sort of a very broad question, but through this discussion and hearing and seeing some of the comments, like the comment about chintz, I think my question about this is sort of, how far can we go back? How far do we go back? Because there's been such a long tradition of cultural appropriation by colonial powers who have kind of renamed so many crafts, renamed so many traditions, and claim them as their own. And I don't know how we can unravel that completely. We can't. But I guess to me, one of the starting points would just be to acknowledge the kind of origins of things, or the paths that certain crafts might have taken, because they're not always singular paths. There are exchanges of ideas and so on. And then my other question is, why is it so hard for some designers to give credit? Why is it so hard to give just simply? I mean, I'm not saying that's enough, like there's more to be done, but why is it so hard to just simply say this technique comes from this place and was done by this artisan, or this is a specific embroidery that is comes from this group of people, and it doesn't really take away, to me, it doesn't take away from the design or the overall product, to just add that other layer and dimension and just say, like, this is from such and such place, and these are the artisans, and here are their faces. Anyway, I don't understand why it's so hard. It seems like a simple step to me. Not saying that's enough, but it's a step.
Right. So acknowledgement and credit. How far back do we go? Well, I mean, certainly for designers, if the community currently has a clear presence in the world, that seems like a no-brainer. Enter in conversation, ask for permission, be willing to pay if wanting to charge. Otherwise, yeah, acknowledging and stating it as fact is important in terms of accountability. Why is it so hard?
I mean, I do blame fashion education, many of these processes, and we're really good at perpetuating the systems of oppression. I mean, we work across them, not necessarily against them, unfortunately, not as much as we would like to. And in this very perhaps linear, more tradition, I don't even know the traditional, whatever form, the old way of perpetuating a model of performance that a fashion designer or a designer would be, especially in the context of fashion, would be this almost untouchable individual that worked in a bubble where it was a magical creative thinker whose entire processes were from their own, right? So as a practice and I'm speaking about the fashion education in an academic context, we have not been teaching actively to to refer to, where from images, you make collage of images and you never, well, not before at least, you would rarely refer to where you were sourcing these images from, neither who took even the picture. So from forms of practice, also from how do you sustain or reflect on your creative practice, I would say partially like designed ignorance in terms of completely invisibilizing multiple participants in the creative process. But in the practice itself of fashion, it is highly collaborative. It doesn't exist solo, it exists in common. I do think this is a different time for fashion education, one where at least we're being observed, and that like in the Peruvian case, being observed by others makes others as well understand that there are other forms of practice. So that single, unique, magical thinker that works on a creative process on their own is no longer necessarily the only model of practice that a fashion design, and I'm speaking of fashion designers in particular, I cannot reflect on other designers too, but the frameworks in which we have situated design as a form for many, many years, and especially fashion, because fashion has sort of had a divorce from design as a discipline until very much today. But I think we have greater frameworks to engage in the practice in a much more critical way. So that is helping to understand, also learning from other forms of practice within design too, when we're talking about formal education in design, to have principles, to practice around frameworks. We briefly mentioned the Design Justice Network, for example. Like, what is it that we can incorporate in the practice that should be like no-brainers? Well, no-brainers for us as well, right? Like citing or referencing whose work this is coming from or who we're working with, transparency in terms of the entire process. How do we recognize that on a website, on a tag, on a brand, or conversation, on compensation, and so on. But yeah, if I think the role of formal education in perpetuating these structures and then how those are disseminated across, right? Going back to the Peruvian examples, and actually I was in conversation with a colleague who's a Peruvian fashion designer in Peru a couple of weeks ago about this particular case. She brought up something that is also another element, how we continue to perpetuate these models, besides like media and communication, like the role of for example, of communication channels such as Vogue, and what that also does to specific forms of engagement in terms of not Vogue in particular, but well, yes too, but specific channels of communication that we have. Oh my God, I lost the word in English and Spanish. Preserved as this magical spaces that define aesthetics and where fashion trends exist and how the practice should be, and the fact that a lot of these models and systems are very obsolete now too. And if that wasn't yet in conversation, I think now, because of the level of access that we now have to more of these mechanisms of communication, it does become an opportunity to see other forms, other forms that feel perhaps more aligned with ideals that we could have around respect for people and planet, and what that means in our own practice. Sorry, that might not respond to your question, but I do think fashion education is to blame for as well, and formal education too, in design.
And I think that that is a great place to end. It was wonderful to have joined Lucia's Parsons class here, Fashion Systems Latin America. I think really focusing on systems, if there's one takeaway from today's talk, certainly is what we all need. So thank you so much, Lucia, for joining La Hora. Thank you all for having me in your class. And thank you all so much for joining us live, or if you're watching the recording.